There are footballers who win trophies. There are footballers who break records. And then there are footballers who make an entire stadium lean forward in their seats because something impossible might happen next. Hatem Ben Arfa was one of those footballers. On his best nights, defenders didn't just struggle to stop him. They simply couldn't understand how he moved. A sudden turn. A change of direction. The ball glued to his feet as he glided past players who seemed frozen for a moment in disbelief. Hatem Ben Arfa was one of those footballers. He was described many times over the course of his career as one of the most naturally gifted players of his generation, a dribbler of extraordinary quality, a man who could, on his best days, make the game look like something it had no right to look like. He scored goals that people still watch. He produced moments that coaches and teammates and commentators struggled to explain with ordinary words. And yet his story is also quieter than you might expect, more gentle, more human. This is that story. And as we tell it, there is no need to hold on to anything tightly. You can let your shoulders settle. Let your breathing slow. Let the words come and go, like soft light through a window. The place to begin is a suburb southwest of Paris. Clamart. A quiet residential town. The kind of place that sits just outside the noise of the city. Streets lined with ordinary buildings. A neighborhood where children played football on concrete and patches of grass wherever they could find them. Hatem Ben Arfa was born on the 7th of March, 1987. His family had roots in Tunisia, part of the large North African community that had settled across the Paris suburbs in the decades following French decolonization. His parents had come to France seeking a better life, and they built one in Clamart. A modest life. A warm one. Growing up in the suburbs of Paris in the late 1980s and through the 1990s, football was everywhere. It was in the streets. It was in the courtyards between apartment blocks. It was in the conversation between boys walking to school. France was in the process of becoming one of the world's great footballing nations, helped by a generation of players who had grown up in exactly those same suburbs. Children of immigrants who had found in football a language that required no translation. Ben Arfa was part of that world from very early on. He kicked a ball almost as soon as he could walk, the way many children in those neighborhoods did. But there was something different about him, something that other boys and adults around him noticed quickly. He had a feel for the ball that was hard to describe, but easy to see. A naturalness, a balance. When he dribbled, when he moved with the ball at his feet, something happened that did not happen when other children dribbled. The ball seemed to stay close to him, as if held by some invisible thread. Those early years in Clamart were uncomplicated in the way that childhood can be. The streets, the games, the small patch of grass where the local children played until it was dark. There was nothing grand about any of it, just a boy and a ball, and the quiet repetition of a skill being built without anyone deciding to build it. When talent is real, it tends to find its way toward the places that can develop it. In France, there was one place above all others where the most gifted young footballers were sent. Its name was Clairefontaine. The Institut National du Football at Clairefontaine was established in 1988, just a year after Ben Arfa was born. It was created with a specific purpose: to identify the most naturally talented young players in France and give them the best possible environment in which to develop. The grounds sat in a forest about 40 kilometers southwest of Paris. It was a calm, green, enclosed world. Training pitches in the mornings, classrooms in the afternoons, a rhythm that was steady and deliberate. Ben Arfa entered Clairefontaine as a young teenager. He was among a small number of boys selected from across the Paris region, which was then, as it still is, one of the richest footballing territories in the world. The boys who entered Clairefontaine were already exceptional by ordinary standards. But inside those walls, the competition was fierce in a quiet way. Everyone there was gifted. The question was what you would do with your gift. The training at Clairefontaine focused heavily on technical development, ball control, first touch, movement. The academy's philosophy was built around the idea that you could not teach a young player to be technically excellent if you waited too long. The fundamentals had to be established early and embedded deeply, and so the boys worked on those things day after day, in sessions that were precise and calm, on pitches that were kept immaculately. For Ben Arfa, Clairefontaine was a place where something that had already been growing in him was given proper soil. The dribbling that had caught people's eyes in Clamart now had a framework around it. He learned to combine his natural instinct with greater technical discipline. He learned how to use both feet. He learned how to read space, how to change direction smoothly, how to keep the ball under pressure. The academy also introduced him to a peer group that would define his generation of French football. Boys who would go on to become some of the most recognizable names in the sport. The friendships formed at Clairefontaine were real ones, built in the shared experience of early mornings and long afternoons, of being away from home young, of growing up together in that quiet green place in the forest. From Clairefontaine, the next step was a professional club's academy. Ben Arfa moved to Olympique Lyonnais, Lyon. He joined their youth setup as a teenager, entering a structure that was, at the time, among the most impressive in French football. Lyon, in the early 2000s, were in the middle of an extraordinary period of dominance in Ligue 1. They would go on to win 7 consecutive league titles between 2002 and 2008. The club had money, organisation, and a clear footballing identity. Their academy was producing talented players regularly, and the first team was a serious European force. Among Ben Arfa's contemporaries in the Lyon youth system was a boy who would become one of the most celebrated strikers in the history of the game. Karim Benzema was also moving through the Lyon Academy at the same time, learning his craft on the same training grounds, playing in the same youth team matches. The two were part of a generation of exceptionally gifted young French players that Lyon were carefully developing. Training with that group every day had its own quiet energy. Early starts. The field still slightly damp. The sound of boots on grass. Instructions from coaches delivered in calm, clear voices. And then the work itself. The repetition, the small-sided games, the individual technical sessions. Ben Arfa thrived in that environment. His dribbling was becoming more refined, his movement more complex, his ability to take on defenders more controlled. Those who watched him train during his teenage years at Lyon speak of someone who stood out even among other talented players. There was something about the way he received the ball, the way he shifted his weight before a dribble, the way he could disguise his next movement, that made him different. Not louder or more forceful, just different, more fluid, more unpredictable. He made his first appearances for the Lyon senior squad as a teenager. These were careful introductions, managed moments, the club protecting their investment while giving him a taste of the professional level. The stadiums were real. The defenders were real. The pace and physicality of first-team football were different from anything the academy had prepared him for. And yet he seemed, on those early occasions, not to be overwhelmed. He seemed, instead, to be curious. The years passed quietly, in the way that young careers do. Training in the autumn rain, matches on cold Saturday afternoons, the gradual accumulation of experience. Ben Arfa was patient in some ways, impatient in others. But the talent was never in question. Lyon won the league title repeatedly during those years. Ben Arfa was part of a squad that knew what it meant to succeed at the highest domestic level, and being inside a club of that consistency had its effect on a young player. You learned what standards looked like. You learned what professional conduct felt like, what serious preparation meant. He received his first recognition from the French national team structure, moving through the youth international ranks. Playing for France at under 21 level was a confirmation that what people had seen in him from the beginning was real. He was among the best young French players of his age group. That was not a small thing. France was producing extraordinary talent in those years, and to be noticed within that group required something genuine. There were moments during his time at Lyon when the senior stage felt fully available to him. When he had the ball and the space and the willingness to take on a defender, something could happen that lifted the crowd in that particular way that only individual skill produces. Not the collective excitement of a team combination, but the more intimate excitement of watching one person do something with a football that surprises everyone in the stadium, including perhaps the player himself. But Lyon was a club built around collective achievement. Their model was the team, the structure, the consistent application of a system. For a player like Ben Arfa, who was most alive when given freedom and space and the license to improvise, that environment had its tensions. Not hostile tensions, just the natural friction between a style of play that valued spontaneity and an organization that valued discipline. These tensions would follow him for the rest of his career, in one form or another. They were not unique to Lyon. They were part of the story of a certain kind of player. In the summer of 2008, Ben Arfa made a significant move. He transferred from Lyon to Olympique de Marseille. It was a move within French football, from one major club to another. But the two institutions had very different identities. Marseille were, and remain, one of the most passionate football clubs in the world. Their supporters were loud and devoted. The Stade Vélodrome, their home ground, had an atmosphere that was unlike any other in French football. The city of Marseille itself had a particular energy, sun-baked and intense, a port city with a long history and a fierce civic pride. Football at the Vélodrome was not a quiet experience. For Ben Arfa, moving to Marseille offered something new. A bigger stage. More freedom, perhaps, to express himself. More expectation, certainly. The supporters at the Vélodrome wanted skill. They wanted entertainment. They wanted players who could make them forget themselves for a moment. Ben Arfa, when he was at his best, was exactly the kind of player they loved. There were matches during his time at Marseille that contained moments people still remember. He was capable, in any given game, of doing something with the ball that no one else on the pitch was thinking of doing. A sudden change of direction at full speed, a dribble through 2 or 3 defenders that left them standing, a finish from an angle that seemed impossible. In League One, he was one of the most talked about players of his position. His name appeared regularly in discussions about the best dribblers in European football. Other players spoke of him with a kind of careful admiration. Coaches who had worked with him described a talent that was genuinely rare. Marseille's Stade Vélodrome, on a warm evening, had a particular quality. The light fading slowly over the city. The noise of the crowd arriving in waves. The green of the pitch under the floodlights. In that setting, with the ball at his feet and space in front of him, Ben Arfa could feel fully himself. He helped Marseille win the League One title in the 2009-10 season. It was a significant achievement for the club, who had waited years for that kind of success. Being part of a championship-winning team at Marseille, one of the great clubs of French football, was a real mark in his career. But football careers are rarely straight lines. They curve and double back on themselves. They take unexpected turns. In the summer of 2010, Ben Arfa moved to England. He joined Newcastle United on loan from Marseille, with the deal made permanent the following year. Newcastle were in the Premier League, the most watched football league in the world. The transfer represented something significant. A French player of real reputation moving to one of English football's historic clubs. Newcastle United had a long history, deep roots in the city, and supporters whose loyalty was unconditional. St. James's Park, their ground, sat in the heart of the city like a cathedral. On match days, the streets around it filled with people in black and white. The atmosphere inside was genuine and old. This was a club that people cared about in the particular way that only communities built around a football team can care. For Ben Arfa, arriving in the northeast of England was a different kind of experience. The weather was different. The pace of the game was different. English football in the Premier League was faster, more physical, more direct than what he had known in France. Defenders pressed harder and tackled more forcefully. Space was more difficult to find and held for a shorter time. And yet, he adapted. He began showing English audiences the same quality that had drawn admiration in France. His dribbling remained extraordinary. His ability to keep the ball under pressure was unusual. And then, on a Saturday afternoon in October 2011, against Bolton Wanderers, he produced what would become perhaps the most famous moment of his career. He received the ball near the centre of the pitch. He began to move forward. And then, over the course of the next several seconds, he dribbled past defender after defender. 5 Bolton players in total. He moved through them with a combination of pace and change of direction and balance that was difficult to process, even watching it multiple times afterward. He finished calmly. The stadium erupted in the way that stadiums do when something genuinely extraordinary has just happened. That goal was discussed widely in the weeks and months and years that followed. It was named the Premier League goal of the season. It was shared millions of times. People who had not watched much football at all knew about it. Among those who watched the Premier League closely, it became a reference point, an example used when talking about the kind of thing that is possible when an individual talent is at its absolute peak. The Newcastle supporters responded to Ben Arfa in the way that supporters always respond to a certain kind of player. When he had the ball and was running at defenders, when the possibility of something extraordinary was building, they leaned forward. They held their breath a little. They wanted to see what would happen. That feeling, the anticipation before something special, was something he produced regularly enough that it became associated with him. But the Premier League was also where Ben Arfa experienced the most difficult moment of his career. To that point, in a match against Manchester City in August 2010, still in the early stages of his time in England, he was the subject of a tackle from Nigel de Jong that broke his leg. The injury was serious. The recovery would take many months. What follows a serious injury in football is a long, quiet process. The surgery, the hospital, the early weeks of immobility, then the slow, careful work of rehabilitation. physiotherapy sessions in the morning, small exercises repeated many times, the patient rebuilding of strength and movement, the field visible from the window of the training ground, still and empty during the times when everyone else was out there. Months passed. Ben Arfa worked through the recovery with the kind of focused attention that serious injury requires. The football world continued around him. Matches were played, goals were scored, seasons moved forward. He was on the outside of all of that, working each day toward the point where he could return. When he did return to the first team, the Bolton goal came not long after. It was as though the time away had not diminished him. The talent was intact. The dribbling instinct was still there. Whatever it was that made him different was not something that injury could remove. His time at Newcastle lasted several years. He had moments of real quality alongside periods of frustration. The relationship between a player of his temperament and the demands of a Premier League club was never entirely simple. There were times when the manager and the player saw things differently, when his absence from the team prompted questions and discussions. These were not dramatic ruptures. They were the ordinary tensions that exist when an individualist operates within a collective structure. The supporters remained fond of him, though. The people who had watched him produce those moments, who had stood in St. James's Park and seen something they had not expected to see, held on to that affection, even when the relationship between player and club became complicated. They remembered what he was capable of. They remembered the Bolton goal. They remembered the way the ground sounded when he started running. By the mid-2000s, Ben Arfa's career had taken him back to France, and then forward again into new chapters. He left Newcastle and spent time back in the French League. He moved to Hull City briefly before returning to France and joining Nice in 2014. At Nice, something significant happened. He found a period of form and consistency that surprised even those who had always believed in his talent. The 2015-16 season at Nice was, for Ben Arfa, a reminder of everything he was capable of. He scored 17 goals in League One that season. He was directly involved in many more. He won games by himself on several occasions. He produced individual moments that belonged to the very highest level of the game. That season, he was voted the best player in League One. The award was called the UNFP Player of the Year, and it was given by the players themselves, the professionals who had watched him and faced him and understood better than anyone what he was doing. Being recognized by your peers in that way is a particular kind of honor. League One that season watched Ben Arfa perform, as he had always theoretically been capable of performing, week after week. The dribbles, the goals from distance, the runs from deep that defenders could not contain, the quieter moments of intelligence, the pass weighted exactly right, the movement off the ball that created space for others. Nice were not a glamorous club in the way that Marseille or Paris were glamorous. They were a smaller club in the south of France, a team built on good organization and collective effort. And yet, in that context, perhaps partly because of the freedom they gave him, Ben Arfa flowered. The city sat on the Mediterranean coast. The light was clear and bright. The training ground was modest, and something about all of that seemed to suit him. The success at Nice brought him to the attention of Paris Saint-Germain. In the summer of 2016, he signed for PSG. It was, in terms of footballing prestige, a significant step. PSG, by that point, were one of the wealthiest clubs in the world. They had Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Angel Di Maria and Edinson Cavani. They were spending enormously and winning the French league regularly. But the years at PSG were difficult ones for Ben Arfa. He did not play regularly. There were long stretches where he was absent from the first team entirely. The relationship between player and club was complicated. He was rarely given the sustained run of games that a player of his kind needs to find rhythm and confidence and the freedom to express himself. There is a particular sadness in watching a gifted player become peripheral. When someone who can produce the things that Ben Arfa could produce is not given a stage on which to produce them, it is a kind of loss. Not a dramatic one, just the quiet loss of something beautiful that could have been more visible. He trained. He waited. He appeared occasionally. But the PSG chapter was not what anyone had hoped it would be. The club had too many options, too much competition. And Ben Arfa's particular needs as a player were not accommodated in the way that would have served everyone best. He left PSG and moved to Rennes in 2019. There, he showed glimpses of what he could still do. The dribbling was still present. The eye for a goal was still there. Age had perhaps taken a little of the pace that had made the Bolton goal possible. But the intelligence remained. The touch remained. The instinct that had been with him since those early evenings in Clermont-Auvergne was still somewhere inside him. Ben Arfa also had time with the French national team across his career. He was capped for the senior France squad and played in significant matches. His international career was perhaps not as full as his talent warranted, the nature of international football being what it is, with competitions for places fierce and tactical systems, often at odds with the kind of freedom he needed. But he was a French international, and in a nation that has produced so many outstanding footballers across the years, that is not a small thing. A career like Ben Arfa's invites a certain kind of reflection. Not regret, exactly. Reflection. Football is a game that rewards many different qualities. Tactical discipline, physical endurance, consistency, teamwork, adaptability. These are all genuinely valued, and they produce outcomes that supporters appreciate and trophies confirm. But there is also another set of qualities that football rewards more rarely, that it sometimes struggles to accommodate, but that it absolutely needs. Spontaneity, individual genius, the willingness to try something that has a real chance of failing, the ability to do something that cannot be coached, that cannot be drilled, that exists only in the moment, and is either there or it isn't. Ben Arfa had those qualities in abundance. He had them from the time he was a child in Clermont. They were the reason people noticed him. They were the reason he was taken to Clairefontaine. They were the reason clubs across France and eventually England wanted him. They were what the Newcastle supporters stood up for. They were what his Ligue 1 peers voted for when they named him the best player in France. The challenge was that football, as a professional sport, is also a system. It has schedules and tactics and relationships and hierarchies. It has expectations about how a player should behave and when and in what way. For a player whose greatest gift was a kind of spontaneous genius, a talent that existed most fully when given freedom and trust and room to make mistakes, fitting inside those systems was not always easy. This is not a criticism of Ben Arfa, nor of the football world. It is simply an honest observation about a particular kind of tension that has always existed in the sport. The individual artist within the collective enterprise, the soloist in the orchestra. It is a tension that never fully resolves, and football is richer for having players who embody it, even when those players find the tension difficult to live with. Think, for a moment, of the specific sensation of watching Ben Arfa at his best. You were watching a match, perhaps on television, perhaps in a stadium. The ball came to him somewhere in the middle third of the pitch. He received it on his left foot, or his right. He was genuinely two-footed in a way that relatively few players are. He took one touch to bring the ball under control, and in that single touch, there was already something different. The ball did not simply stop. It was placed, with an almost surgical precision, exactly where it needed to be for what he was about to do next. He looked up. He saw a defender in front of him. And then something happened in his body. A shift of weight. A feint so small that it was almost invisible. And suddenly, he was past. The defender had committed one way, and Ben Arfa had gone the other. So smoothly that it looked casual. So quickly that the defender could not recover. And then there might be another defender. And another. And he moved through them with the same combination of balance and instinct and speed that seemed to operate on a different level from ordinary dribbling. Not just faster, not just trickier. Something more fundamental than those things. Something like a different relationship with the ball itself. And then the finish. Sometimes powerful, sometimes gentle. Placed in the corner, as though he had all the time in the world, as though no one had just been trying to stop him for the past 6 seconds. The crowd reacted. Of course they reacted. That is what crowds do when they see something real. The people who played alongside Ben Arfa over the years spoke about him in ways that were consistent across different clubs and different countries. They spoke about his quality in training. They spoke about the things he could do with a football that were genuinely surprising, even to experienced professionals who had seen a great deal. They spoke about his confidence, sometimes his difficulty, and also about a fundamental warmth that was part of who he was. He was not, by most accounts, a complicated person in the ways that the word complicated is sometimes used as a soft synonym for difficult or hostile. He was a person who loved football, who had loved it since he was very small, who experienced it most fully when he was given the conditions that brought out what was best in him. When those conditions were not present, when the environment was wrong, or the trust was absent, or the system left no room for what made him different, he struggled. That is a human thing, not an unusual thing. The players who understood him most seemed to be those who could see past the headline of mercurial genius to the person inside it. A person who had come from Clamart and Clairefontaine and Lyon, who had worked his way through the French football system, who had crossed the Channel and adapted to a different game, who had survived a serious injury and come back from it, who had produced, on more occasions than are easy to count, something that most professional footballers cannot produce at all. There is something that happens when you watch footage of the Bolton goal, even many years later, even knowing what is going to happen, even having seen it before. He receives the ball wide on the right, in his own half. He begins to move. The first defender comes at him, and he goes past. The second defender tries to cut off his angle, and he shifts inside. The third defender, the fourth, the fifth. And throughout all of this, the ball remains with him, close to his feet, responsive to every change of direction, as if it knows where he is going before he does. The finish is the quietest part. He rolls it into the net with his left foot. The goalkeeper had no chance. The stadium does not respond immediately, as though the people inside it need a moment to process what they have just witnessed. And then the noise comes. That moment exists in the permanent record of the Premier League. It will be there as long as football is discussed and watched. And it stands for something larger than one goal in one match in one season. It stands for a certain kind of talent that is genuinely rare in the world, the kind that cannot be taught, cannot be manufactured, and cannot be predicted. It simply exists, or it doesn't. In Ben Arfa, it existed. As the years passed and his playing career moved into its later stages, The moments became less frequent, but never entirely absent. A player like this does not simply lose the gift. It does not disappear cleanly with age or injury or change of circumstance. It fades gradually, the way the light fades at the end of a long day. Still there, until suddenly it isn't. He continued playing into his early 30s. Brief chapters at different clubs. Moments of the old quality flickering through. The dribble that no one was expecting. The goal that came from nothing. The touch on the ball that still carried that same quality of someone operating on a slightly different frequency from everyone else around him. Football people who follow the game closely would sometimes say, when Ben Arfa was mentioned, that the story of his career is one of the great what-ifs of his generation. What if the conditions had always been right? What if every club he had played for had given him the specific environment that brought out his best? What if the injury in Manchester had not happened when it did? What if this season and that season had been different? These are not criticisms. They are expressions of genuine feeling about genuine talent. When someone shows you what they are capable of, you naturally want to see all of it, for as long as possible, in as many settings as possible. When you feel that something was not fully realized, you feel the absence of it. But perhaps there is another way to look at it. Ben Arfa did, in fact, produce an extraordinary amount over the course of his career. He won a league title at Lyon and a league title at Marseille. He was named the best player in League One by his fellow professionals. He scored a goal that was recognized as the best in the Premier League that season, and that was watched and rewatched by millions of people. He dribbled past defenders in France and England and left them standing in ways that those defenders probably still remember. He played professional football at the highest level for nearly 2 decades. He was part of the generation of French players who emerged from those Paris suburbs and from the academies of the 1990s and early 2000s, and went on to represent the richest era in French football history. He was recognized by people who know the game deeply as someone whose natural ability was as high as anyone's. That is not a diminished story. That is a life spent doing something beautiful. Let the story settle now, gently. The night is quiet. Outside, wherever you are, the world is still. Cars passing slowly on distant roads. The occasional sound of wind. The ordinary sounds of a building at rest. And somewhere in your mind, if you let it be there, is the image of a young boy in Clamart, kicking a ball in the street. The light is fading. The evening is coming. He keeps the ball close to his feet with a naturalness that looks effortless, because it is, in a sense, effortless. Not because he hasn't worked at it, but because some things fit so naturally inside a person that the working and the being are the same thing. He grows older in the way that all children do. The streets of Clamart give way to the training pitches of Clairefontaine, green and quiet in the forest southwest of Paris. The early mornings, the patient work on technique, the other boys who will also go on to professional careers, each developing their own gifts in their own way. And then Lyon, the yellow and red, the vast professional structure, learning what it means to be a footballer at the highest level, learning that talent alone is necessary, but not sufficient, that the game asks other things of you too, things that take time to learn. And Marseille, with its noise and its warmth and its supporters, who want to feel something every time they watch their team. The velodrome on a warm evening, the smell of the city, the sound of the crowd. And then England, the journey across the Channel, the new rhythms of a new league, the cold northeast of England, St. James's Park with its grey stone and its passionate crowd in black and white, the way the stadium sounds when something is about to happen. And the Bolton goal, those few seconds that contain more skill and more beauty than most footballers are able to produce in a career. The ball moving with him as he moves through 5 defenders, the calm finish, the delayed roar, and nice, years later, where everything that had always been there came together in a single season, with a grace and completeness that was almost surprising. 17 goals. Player of the Year. Recognition from the people who understood best. And PSG, and the difficulties, and Rennes, and the later chapters. And throughout all of it, in better moments and harder ones, the same quality, the same dribbling instinct, the same relationship with the ball, the same capacity, always present even when rarely expressed, to produce something that other people cannot produce. The story of Hatem Ben Arfa is, in the end, a gentle one. Not without difficulty, not without complication, but gentle in the way that all honest human stories are gentle, when you step back from them and see them whole. A boy from the suburbs of Paris who could do things with a football that were genuinely rare, who worked his way through the best football education France could offer, who played at the highest levels in France and England, who had his best season at the age of 28 and was recognized for it by the people who knew the most, who produced a moment in Newcastle that will be remembered as long as the Premier League is remembered. He was not always easy. He was not always consistent. He was not always what the clubs and coaches around him wanted him to be. But he was always himself. And what he was, at his core, was one of the most naturally gifted footballers of his generation. Let your breathing slow now. Let the thoughts come and go without holding on to any of them. The images of the story can be there if they want to be. The quiet streets of Clamart, the green of Clairefontaine in the early morning, the warmth of Marseille, the grey stone of St. James Park, the sound of a ball rolling across grass. There is nothing to carry into sleep. No tension, no urgency. Just the quiet end of a story well told, about a man who could do beautiful things, who did them as often as circumstances allowed, and who left behind, in the permanent record of the game, enough proof of what he was. Let the football roll slowly to a stop somewhere on a quiet pitch. Let the stadium lights dim. Let the crowd go home. Let the city grow still. And let yourself drift down into rest, easy and unhurried, carried by nothing more than the calm weight of a story. Chant nicht.